Right now, inside the brain of someone who feels anxious for no clear reason, an ancient alarm system built to detect lions on the savannah is firing at full strength over an email that hasn't been answered yet. And research suggests your brain, at the chemical level, genuinely cannot tell the difference. Zoom in past the racing thoughts, past the tight chest, down to a single cluster of neurons deep in the temporal lobe, called the amygdala. Neuroscientists have found that this almond-shaped structure does not distinguish between a physical predator and a social threat, a financial worry, or an unanswered text message. Scientists believe the amygdala evaluates all of them using the same ancient circuitry, flooding the body with the same chemical signal regardless of whether the danger is a tiger or a thought. This is where physics and biology intersect precisely. The mechanism is called the sympathetic nervous system activation cascade. Within milliseconds of a perceived threat, the amygdala signals the hypothalamus, which activates the adrenal medulla, releasing adrenaline directly into the bloodstream. The American Heart Association has documented that this cascade increases heart rate, redirects blood flow to large muscle groups, and sharpens visual attention, all within 2 to 3 seconds. This is not nervousness. It is a full-body electrochemical event, measurable in blood chemistry and heart rhythm alike. Most explanations stop at, it's just stress. A 7-minute doctor's visit rarely has time to explain what stress actually is at the mechanistic level. And most wellness content settles for vague reassurance. But research suggests the real architecture of anxiety runs through at least 5 interconnected systems, each with its own physical signature. And understanding them can change your entire relationship with the feeling itself. The first mechanism is HPA-axis hyperactivation. Unlike the fast adrenaline surge, cortisol release through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis unfolds over minutes rather than seconds, sustaining a state of alertness long after the initial trigger has passed. Studies published in the Journal of Neuroscience indicate that in chronic anxiety, this system can become dysregulated, failing to properly shut itself back down, meaning the alarm keeps ringing even once the danger, real or imagined, has clearly passed. The second mechanism is amygdala hyperconnectivity. Neuroimaging research suggests that in people who experience persistent anxiety, the amygdala shows strengthened neural connections to regions involved in attention and memory, essentially making threat detection more sensitive and more readily triggered. This is not a character flaw or a mindset. It is a measurable difference in neural wiring, and research indicates it can develop, and importantly, can also reverse in response to sustained experience. The third mechanism is reduced prefrontal regulation. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's rational decision-making region, normally sends calming signals down to the amygdala, essentially telling it, "Stand down, this isn't a real threat." Studies suggest that under chronic stress, this top-down regulatory connection weakens, meaning the brain's alarm system operates with less oversight from its own reasoning center, a bit like a fire alarm with a disconnected off switch. The fourth mechanism is GABA and glutamate imbalance. Your brain relies on a delicate balance between glutamate, its primary excitatory neurotransmitter, and GABA, its primary inhibitory one. Research suggests that in anxiety, this balance can tip toward excess excitation, leaving neurons in a persistently primed, ready-to-fire state. This is part of why anxious thoughts can feel like they arrive faster than you can process them, because chemically, your neurons genuinely are firing faster. The fifth mechanism is interoceptive amplification. Your brain constantly monitors internal signals like heart rate and breathing, but research suggests that in anxiety, this internal monitoring system becomes oversensitive, misreading normal bodily fluctuations as dangerous. A slightly faster heartbeat from climbing stairs can be misinterpreted by an overactive interoceptive system as the onset of a heart attack, triggering a second wave of anxiety about the anxiety itself. Here's a way to picture these 5 mechanisms working together. Imagine a smoke detector installed not just in your kitchen, but wired into every room of the house, including ones with no stove at all. Now imagine that detector's sensitivity has been turned up so high it goes off from steam in the shower. And imagine the wire that normally lets you calmly walk over and silence it has come loose. That's amygdala hyperconnectivity, GABA imbalance, and reduced prefrontal regulation working together, not a single broken system, but several systems, each slightly miscalibrated, amplifying each other. Here's where age changes the picture in ways rarely discussed. After 55, research suggests the body's baseline cortisol regulation becomes somewhat less efficient, meaning recovery from an anxious spike takes longer than it once did. At the same time, studies indicate that reduced vagal tone, common with aging, means the natural braking system that normally calms the body after a stress response becomes less responsive. This may explain why many people report new or worsening anxiety symptoms later in life, even without a clear external cause. The underlying regulatory machinery itself has changed. After all this biology, the actionable insight is small enough to feel almost anticlimactic. Extending your exhale longer than your inhale for as little as 90 seconds. Research indicates this specific breathing pattern directly stimulates the vagus nerve, which in turn signals the amygdala to reduce its activity. And Harvard Medical School has noted this remains one of the few interventions with consistent, replicated effects on the physical anxiety response, independent of what caused it. But here's what almost no one knows about what happens next, and this may be the most quietly important part of this entire episode. Research suggests that repeated anxious episodes can, over time, actually lower the threshold at which your amygdala triggers the next one, meaning each anxious episode can make your brain slightly more sensitive to the next potential trigger. This isn't fate. Studies also indicate this threshold is adjustable in both directions, meaning consistent calming practices can raise it back up, physically retraining the alarm system to require a louder signal before it sounds. There is a sixth mechanism worth naming, the gut microbiome's role in anxiety. Research suggests the gut produces the majority of the body's serotonin and communicates with the brain continuously via the vagus nerve. Some studies indicate shifts in gut bacteria composition are associated with changes in anxiety-like behavior, suggesting the unease many people feel in their stomach may be a genuinely two-way biological conversation, not simply a metaphor for nervousness. There is a seventh mechanism, connecting back to genetics and environment together: epigenetic sensitization. Emerging research in epigenetics suggests that early or repeated stress exposure can alter gene expression related to cortisol receptor density through methylation, potentially making the entire stress response system more reactive for years afterward. Some scientists believe this may partly explain why anxiety can appear to run in families, not purely through inherited genes, but through inherited patterns of gene expression shaped by shared experience. There is an eighth mechanism worth understanding: mitochondrial energy cost. Just as with grief and prolonged emotional strain, sustained cortisol exposure appears to reduce mitochondrial efficiency, meaning chronic anxiety can produce genuine, measurable physical fatigue even without physical exertion. This is one reason anxious exhaustion can feel disproportionate to actual activity levels. The body's cellular energy systems are working overtime, simply managing an alarm that won't stop ringing. There is a ninth mechanism concerning sleep architecture specifically. Research suggests anxiety reduces the proportion of time spent in slow-wave sleep while increasing nighttime awakenings, meaning the brain is denied the very repair processes it most needs to recalibrate an overactive threat detection system. This can create a feedback loop, where poor sleep further sensitizes the amygdala, which then further disrupts sleep the following night. There is a 10th mechanism, often overlooked entirely: muscular tension as a feedback signal. Studies suggest chronically tensed muscles, particularly in the jaw, shoulders, and neck, send ongoing sensory signals back to the brain that can be interpreted as confirmation of threat, effectively closing a loop between physical tension and psychological anxiety. This may explain why physical relaxation techniques, though simple, appear to interrupt anxiety through a genuinely separate neural pathway than breathing alone. Taken together, these 10 mechanisms describe something worth sitting with. Anxiety is not a personality trait, a weakness, or an overreaction. It is a distributed, physical, measurable process spanning the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the gut, the muscles, the genome, and the cell's own energy systems, all slightly miscalibrated in the same protective direction, all capable, according to current research, of being recalibrated again. It's important to say clearly, this science is shared to help you understand the real, physical mechanics of anxiety, not to diagnose or replace professional care. And if anxiety feels persistent or overwhelming, speaking with a doctor or licensed mental health professional remains the right next step, since general science communication like this can never substitute for individualized care. Now, zoom out as far as physics allows. The same electromagnetic forces governing the sodium and potassium ions racing through your neurons right now govern lightning splitting the sky and the aurora bending across the poles. Your anxious heartbeat and a star's fusion reaction both ultimately answer to the same physical laws. Perhaps the most remarkable part of anxiety, seen this way, is not that it malfunctions, it's that it exists at all. A leftover of a nervous system built with such extraordinary care to keep you alive that it now sometimes protects you from dangers that were never really there. That, in its own strange way, is proof of how thoroughly your body was built to fight for you. If this changed how you think about a feeling you've carried for years, send it to someone who needs to hear that their anxiety isn't weakness, isn't overthinking, and isn't a flaw. It's an ancient survival system, slightly overtuned, and entirely capable of recalibrating. Because here's the question worth carrying with you until next time. If your body's alarm system can be retrained to require a louder signal before it sounds, what would it take to teach yours to trust the silence again? That's where we're headed next.